Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be interviewing Daniel Freedman, an International Book Award recipient. Although he works in multiple forms of engineering and the scientific world, he is also a celebrated writer with his main focus lying in reconciling the biblical account with scientific observation through his biblical clock formula. His main collection of works is his Inspired Studies trilogy, but he has more recently written a novel titled The Biblical Clock in 2019 with his co-author, Dr. Dania Sheldon. I have linked it in the video description below. So, Mr. Freedman, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was born in Chile and came to Canada as a teenager and studied engineering, physics, and then I worked in the space industry for about 37 years and specifically worked with NASA on the space telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope, which had a lot of the cosmology discoveries. So that kept me up to speed with all the stuff going on in cosmology and so on, and kept my original kind of love in school about that subject all the way through on my career, which I'm sure you'll ask me later about my books. So that's kind of where that interest came from.
That's really cool. So what inspired you to pursue writing, especially since you already have an established career in the scientific and engineering worlds?
Yeah, I didn't look at writing as a career. I had my career, and I've always had questions in my mind about how the universe came to be, and I had the answers from the science side as from my studies and my career, and they were missing a few key things. And I also I'm observant, and I study the religion textbooks. So I looked at that. So I wasn't trying to pursue a career. I always had the question in my mind, and at some point, I read a certain book that kind of gave me a tractable way to start at the solution, and then I went to work on that and just wrote it down for myself in about 5 or 6 pages. And people knew I was interested in the topic, so they were always asking me questions about it. And I started talking to them about it, and I started giving talks. And somebody came up to me one evening and said, "Well, you got to put this in a book." And I go, "I'm not a writer." She said, "No, you got to put this in a book." So that's how it started.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think everybody has those questions at some point. So I think you covered this already a little bit, but what directed you towards writing about the biblical clock and your formula specifically?
It's exactly what I just said. I mean, I had several questions, but I'm trying to tackle each question in another book. But my biggest question was, what's going on between these 6 days of creation and these 13.8 billion years in science? And when I found a way to attack that problem, because it looked completely intractable, and developed this, as you call it, this formula, that's what got it all going. And then, of course, when you can't just write 5 pages because nobody can understand it, because they haven't been looking at the problem for 10 years like I was, for 20 years. So I had to write a whole pile of stuff around it to make it explainable and give the right background and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So how do you balance your writing career with your other professions and personal life? It sounds like you're probably really busy.
Yeah, it's basically, I need a break from the normal work. So in those breaks, I study this stuff, and then I try to write in holiday periods, the holiday period is coming up now. I'm gonna kind of be skiing one day and writing one day, every other day kind of thing, and I'm sure I'll make a lot of progress. I don't make so much progress during the normal time, but during those times I make lots of progress.
Yeah. So what was your purpose in writing your Inspired Studies collection? I know you've kind of gone over that, but what are the some specific questions that you had set out to answer, and what message are you trying to convey to readers?
Sure. It started with the question about, is it 6 days or 13 billion years? And so that was kind of my first book. And And then I was sitting at the time with my 13-year-old niece one day, talking to her about it. And she says, you boys are always interested in stars and galaxies and stuff. I'm interested in people. I just studied about Lucy. Lucy's this 3 million year old skeleton that's been found. I need to know where people came from, never mind the cosmology. So that became my second book, where what's the story with humans? Did we evolve like science is postulating, or what's really going on, and so on. So that was my second book. And then I was talking to somebody else and said, okay, I read your 2 books, and you kind of tell me that there's a way to fit together the religious belief and the scientific theories that fit together, and the whole thing works. But okay, so that's that. But is there still something going on now? Like, is there still some interaction with some supreme being now? Is history a random thing, or is there something underlying it? So that became my third book in the series. And I thought I was done with the Inspired series, because I kind of gone from creation to the end of times. And then people said, you need to make this more accessible to the average reader. So then I wrote with my co-author, The Biblical Clock, which kind of made it more of a narrative, and talked about the whole thing in one book in a coherent way, and it has way more sales than the other 3 books, and it has been much more accessible as for people to start with, and then for those that really want to go deeper than that, they can go to the other 3 books. But for the average person that just doesn't want to spend too much time on this, but wants some answers, that's how that series came together.
So you mentioned you co-wrote it with Dr. Dania Sheldon. So how did you guys come to work together, and how did you collaborate while writing the book?
Yeah, so I had an editor for my first book, but then I talked to a friend of mine that's also a writer. He writes yoga books, and he says, I work with Dania right here in town. She's amazing. You should meet her. So I met Dania, and she edited my second and third book. And then when somebody told me, you need to write a very different book with a narrative, I said to Dania, how about we change roles? So far, I have kind of put together the outline, written the book, and then you've edited to death and made it much better. But you followed all my stuff, so you're super constrained. How about I put the outline together, we review that together, then you write, I will write all the facts for every chapter for you, but I'm not going to write the chapter. I'm just going to put, this is the purpose what we're trying to explain in this chapter. These are the facts for it. And you write it, and then I'll edit it, not for English, because that's not my strength. I'll edit it for accuracy, and then you edit it for English again. And that's how we did it. And it's much better than if I wrote it.
Yeah, so what's your advice for aspiring writers based on your personal experiences? And then do you have any advice maybe for people specifically wanting to write about theology?
Yeah, so, my advice, oops, that's my phone. Sorry, I didn't turn it off. My advice for writers is just write. I didn't think I was a writer. And maybe you just have to get on and write and start with it. And, then you're going to get feedback from your, give me one sec. Oh, that stopped. Then you have to get feedback from people that read your books, and the next one is a little better, and the next one's a little better, and you just get on with it. I think you just got to get on with it. My other advice is, I learned the hard way. In my first book, I gave presentations, and then I wrote it. In my second book, I wrote the book, and then I gave presentations. And I found when I gave the presentation that based on the questions and the feedback from the audience, I gave the next presentation a little bit different. And really, it would have been way better to give about 4 or 5 presentations and then write the book, because the presentations, you have very little investment. You just write a few paragraphs, and you give a presentation, that's a few hours of work, not a year. And then you can get a lot of feedback from your oral presentation, and that might change how you structure the whole book, even, even the table of contents. So in terms of theology, the approach I have taken, because I read a lot of theology books, most of the books try to sell you on something, and I don't react well to that. I just want the facts. Just tell me the facts and let me make up my mind. And you can see the reviews on Amazon that people say that's what's good about my books. I'm not out trying to sell anybody anything. I had the question. I want to look for answers, and I'm just presenting what I found. I have made my own conclusions about it, but I keep changing my mind, and I'm letting other people make their own conclusions. I'm not trying to sell one way of thinking or another way of thinking. If you try and do that, you can be very successful, because if you're selling one way of thinking that the majority of the world likes, and then they'll really buy your books. But that's not me. So I just put down the facts as detached as I can be.
Yeah, that's really important, especially when you're writing about theology. So, like for people who might not have read your book yet and are watching this maybe, what would you say is an overview of your books and novel, a brief look at what they would be getting if they read your book?
Yeah, in all my books, the subtitle tells you the kind of question that it's trying to answer, and they'll be getting an understanding of the latest science related to that question that a layman can understand. I'm not expecting anybody to have a PhD in anything. And an honest explanation. Scientists like theologists can get carried away with how much we know and not telling what we know and what we don't know. And then an honest outline of what the theology of that issue is. And then some suggestions on how they come together and they don't come together, and how they illuminate each other, so that they can then have a way more informed way to decide what their original question. So that's kind of what they're going to get.
Okay, well, I think that's all the questions that I had for you. Do you have anything else that you want to add?
No, thank you so much for having me. I think the only thing, if people want to get into the series, I would start with a biblical clock. Okay. Because that's kind of the overview and the easiest one to read, and then it'll be obvious from the book if they want to go deeper into humans or cosmology or end of times, to go to the other three books. But the easiest place to start, I'm told by the readers, is to start with a biblical clock.
Okay, that makes sense. So thank you for taking the time to talk with me. And then for anybody watching the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next week.